Hello, my name is Mark Liebig. I'm a soil scientist with the Ag Research Service in Mandan, North Dakota, and I'm honored to have an opportunity to share a little bit about some of the work that we've done here at Mandan on the topic of soil carbon. I want to thank George Sperry for the invitation. I think that came back in September, and also the help from Ruth and Jason getting the recording out to you all and so forth. My preference obviously would be to be there in person, but ARS isn't permitting us to do any travel for conferences, so I have to abide by that. So that's the reality. Yeah, but we'll go through these slides, and we should have some time near the end, and we can take any questions you might have or any discussion and so forth. So, all right, so I'll go ahead and share my screen here. Hopefully you can see my title slide, Farming and Ranching for Soil Carbon, Management Considerations for the Northern Great Plains. As I was thinking about this talk and trying to frame it out in terms of a roadmap, just some questions that came up kind of help sort of provide a flow for it. The first of which is, why are we talking about this? And then that kind of leads to, what's the status of soil carbon? Basically, what's our carbon debt in the region, and what have we recovered through different types of management? That then lends itself to the question of, should we be looking just at soil carbon, or do we need to be thinking about an overall greenhouse gas balance? Because we're talking about, climate regulation services from different land management practices. It seems like we need to be a little more inclusive. And then finally, after I'll share a little bit of my research on that topic. That's a little more recent research that I have on that, and that naturally lends itself to a question of, really what are we managing for here in the whole issue of soil carbon. So that's a roadmap. So why are we talking about this? Well, climate change is here. I mean, people have been talking about it for quite some time, and there's all these forecasts through the National Climate Assessment as to what's going to happen. But it's here. Things are getting hotter. We're having fewer colder days. We got precipitation events that can be pretty heavy at times. That can really stress the soil resource, and generally we're getting just more climatically extreme, and that's kind of troubling, because Great Plains we're known for our extremes, but we're going to be stretched even further. And so that's really, I think, the driver here. Now, what's causing this? Well, we've got these gases in the atmosphere that have the capacity to trap heat, and so when we look at that fact, then the way to remediate that is to either you can either stop emitting those gases, which these are often tied to fossil fuel use. So that's a rough road. I mean, that's something that's not going to happen overnight, and so there, maybe we look at other ways that we could maybe find ways to be able to pull some of these gases out of the atmosphere, and that kind of gets to this whole point of carbon sequestration and what we might be able to do with agriculture. Now, this is not anything new. I mean, people have been talking about this for a long time at the global level. I mean, there's all these different initiatives that have been put forth to encourage farmers across a range of spatial scales, whether they're smallholders all the way to really large producers, to recommend practices that can sequester carbon, and also, I guess, in a way, make agriculture perhaps a bit more, I guess, a resilient to the challenges that we have with the more extreme weather conditions. And so there's these broad systemic efforts that have been proposed. There's also sort of a marketing aspect of this as well that is tied to actually putting a price on carbon. And so there's these different carbon markets, and perhaps some of you have been approached by individuals who are representing companies that are looking for farmers that are practicing certain types of practices that are known to sequester carbon. And so it's a really exciting time. Now these carbon markets, I'll admit, they're kind of complex. I had a little role in some of this back in the mid 2000s with the Chicago Climate Exchange, and it ties things together from the standpoint of people who are organizations that emit greenhouse gases and those who are known to sequester greenhouse gases. And the principle simply is something like this. Now this is simplified, but it's something that I can understand anyway. But say, for instance, you've got one organization that is emitting greenhouse gases. Okay, all right, and I just share this as the 100 megagrams of CO2 equivalent is just an example. Okay. And then you have another organization or a co-op or something that is sequestering carbon, either through technological means or through some sort of natural process. Now, what you have here is you have one that's an emitter, one that's sequestering this carbon, and it provides an opportunity for what's being sequestered to be transferred to the organization or entity that is emitting the gases. And so you when you do that transfer, it's essentially considered to be an offset of those emissions. All right. Now, this isn't done for free. To be able to say that you're, say, CO2 neutral, that's going to cost you, and that's where this market comes in. And so there's essentially a transfer then of money from the organization who's emitting the CO2 to the atmosphere to the one that is sequestering it. Okay, and this allows the organization emitting the greenhouse gases to essentially state that they're now they're carbon neutral. They have net zero emissions and so forth. And so that's the principle of it. And the whole figure here, I handed to Diana Bagnall with the Soil Health Institute. She had a version of this, and it's like, well, this is something I really got to share, because this is in a nutshell is just how this whole carbon market thing works. Now there are a lot of questions and a lot of things that tie into soil science to make this whole thing work. Most importantly is like, well, okay, what if our portfolio of different land management practices, what are they doing to the soil carbon balance? Okay, if you're going to provide offsets, you got to know how much you're sequestering, right? And hopefully you're not losing anything. But and then second, that gets to the point of additionality, meaning that you can actually count on the practice actually drawing down CO2 from the atmosphere. That's really important. The other part is that once it's sequestered, are you able to keep it sequestered? And that becomes to this term called permanence. Okay, and for a lot of soil carbon that is sequestered in near surface depths, that permanence is a little questionable, particularly in a warming world. It's only when we can sequester that carbon in deeper soil depths does that become less of a concern. But those are just two terms that you hear a lot with carbon markets, and I'm sure if you go to a glossary online somewhere, you can find better definitions than what I offered here. But the two things to really be aware of. The other thing is that it's just not soil carbon. I'm going to talk about this a little more here in a few slides, but there's other greenhouse gases out there that we have to consider. And some markets do consider the full balance, but others do not. Okay. So, but let's just focus on soil carbon. Okay. And so this whole issue of land management effects on soil carbon, first, we kind of got to look back and ask ourselves what has happened in the past. And so for that, we have to look at, how has the land been managed previously, and how has it changed with agriculture over time? And historically, here in the Northern Great Plains, we've had farming going on for at least 800 years with the Mandan, the Rikara, Hidatsa. Unfortunately, much of that land is now underwater, so we have to rely on what happened when agriculture started on the uplands, when we were essentially converting that prairie, and that data set happens to actually be fairly rich, and it's interesting to see how that has evolved. Now, if you put a timeline on this and how things have looked, and this is simplified, but you can see soil carbon there on the y-axis, time on the x. You've got this conversion, which initially was a lot of physical disturbance and so forth, and that exposed the soil to the elements, and you have a lot of mineralization, perhaps some erosion and so forth. There's a big drop, and then you finally you just sort of establish a new baseline based on whatever the predominant practice is at the time, and then there could be a change in management that can then allow us to begin to sort of accrue carbon and sort of move back, ideally back to closer to where we were when we started. Now this how much have we lost in the Northern Great Plains? It's pretty sizable. If you look across the literature, this is just specific to the Great Plains. The estimate is right around, a little over 40% of soil organic C. And then this is just dry land cropping, right? If you take that number and we're a large area, obviously, and so if you look at the area of farmland, the Great Plains, and across all of the agricultural land in the continental United States, that's about a fifth of the carbon that we've lost just in our region. And I've broken this down, looking at the north, central, and southern Great Plains, and it's all pretty sizable, decrease over time. How did we get here? Well, we got here using production practices that were just really not very intensive from the standpoint of cropping intensity. Fallow was used a lot. That was not efficient from the standpoint of water use. It also had some obvious, drawbacks with respect to the health of the soil as well. But we made some changes. There's some technology came along that allowed us to be able to manage weeds in a way that allows us to reduce the physical disturbance of the soil. This is what herbicides allowed, and once that happened, that allowed us to be able to create a mat or a mulch on the surface, reduce that evaporation, reduce that erosion, improve water use efficiency. And then once you could do that, then you could start intensifying your crop rotations. You could remove that fallow. And then there's all kinds of exciting, interesting things you could do with respect to sequencing and diversity. And ideally, maybe even including perennials in the mix periodically, and that can provide an opportunity to get other enterprises as part of the production system. And so that's towards the end of the graph where things might be able to increase at even a greater rate, provided you've got a good rotation, and the carbon balance is more slanted towards more inputs than outputs. Now, the question that some people ask is that, well, okay, if you've been doing no-till for a long time and you've been doing continuous cropping and maybe even incorporated, cover crops and livestock, how does that measure up over time relative to an undisturbed state? And so what's nice at Mandan, we've got these long-term cropping systems and also grazing systems that allow us to look at this question. Now, on our Area 4 SCD research farm, we've been doing no-till and continuous cropping since 1984, so not quite 40 years. And then we also have some long-term grazing studies that have been in place since 1916. I mean, so they got some good history. Really, actually, just fantastic research places to learn about how different things change over time. But what you see here, this is what's just amazing, is that even though this cropland was converted in the mid 50s, okay, so there was a pretty big drop, but then in 84 we changed to no-till continuous cropping. But what you see is that we're still seeing a sizable difference between the cropland and the grazeland. It's about, well, here, it's about 25 megagrams, and you can see, that the lower depths are pretty equivalent with respect to the amount of carbon that's down, below a foot, but where we're still seeing deficits is in the top foot, and it is especially in the top 2 inches of soil. And so we have a long ways to go to be able to get back to, to sort of a native type system, if that's even possible. Now, the question is, well, why is it taking so long? Well, what you can do is that you can look at different production practices and the influence they have on soil carbon on an annual basis. And so what I've done here is sort of a meta-analysis of sorts, looking at published results on soil carbon in the top foot of soil, and then on the y-axis here you can see the soil carbon change. And don't worry about the fact that the units are in metric. It doesn't really matter that much. The point being here is that you've got this zero line, right? Okay, right here in the middle, and so anything below that you're losing carbon. Anything above that you're accruing carbon on average. Okay, so from that, what you see is that any practice that has fallow included in it is going to lose carbon. No surprise. Minimum tillage without fallow, so we're cropping continuously, but you got some minimum tillage. That's essentially net zero. So there's no real change over time there. It's only when you get to using no-till, continuous cropping, or you overlay some livestock integration with that, do you see sort of a long-term soil carbon accrual. But, okay, what does this mean in terms of sort of an amount, sort of an offset per se? Well, it's not that much. It really isn't. That 500,000 pounds of CO2 per acre per year, that comes out to about 150 to 240 pounds of carbon per acre per year. It's not a lot. It really, really isn't. It's so when thinking back to the previous slide here, you're looking at a gap of 25 metric tons. It's going to take a while with this type of management to be able to make that gap. And as you'll see here in a bit, is that actually that native grass is also accruing carbon over time and at a higher rate. So they may both be increasing, but the other one may be increasing at moving away from the dryland cropping. And so it's a slow accrual rate. Now, what's interesting here is that if you take the same data and then overlay another point on the graph where I've compiled results on different sorts of perennial grasses, whether they're biofeedstocks or some of our intermediate wheatgrass trials here at Mandan, that carbon accrual rate increases by about a factor of 3. I mean, it's pretty substantial, and some of that carbon accrual is happening at lower depths, where the issue of permanence is less of a concern, because if you store carbon at lower depths, that is something that it's cooler down there. It's going to mineralize at a much slower rate. It's also not going to be something that could be necessarily affected by any physical disturbance if there were tillage or so forth. So yeah, this is sort of an interesting sort of counterpoint to the whole dryland cropping thing, is that when you see what's happening with respect to carbon accrual under perennial grass, it's a big difference. And so you can see why there's been some talk about why CRP was so held up as being such an important program for potential for carbon accrual. That's perennial grasses. That is a reason why. I mean, and a lot of that accrual is happening in near surface depths, but as long as we don't disturb it, it's something that sticks around for a good time. So the other question is, all right, this whole issue of cover crops. All right, now, what is its effect on soil carbon within our region? Short answer, I'm really not too sure just yet. I do know that the studies that we've done in the short term are such that the production of the cover crops are completely dependent upon the presence of timely rain. So if we don't get it, if we seed in late summer, like after a wheat crop, the cover crops, if we don't get rain within 2 years or 2 weeks, we're not going to have hardly any production at all. And so if you're not getting production from that cover crop, there's no carbon going into the soil. It's just, you've spent a lot of money on seed. In the years where we do get timely precipitation, you can get some significant biomass produced, but I haven't been able to really detect an effect on the soil carbon in the near surface depths or even the microbial properties yet. And so it's the late summer seeding is a little questionable. We've been intercropping cover crops in corn at the V4 stage, and the biomass production there is not that much, and we really haven't been able to detect any changes in the soil just yet. So this is sort of a long-term question that is going to take some more time. We do have a couple of studies where we have a cover crop as a sort of a full season crop within a rotation that can be used as forage. And we hope to get those results out here soon, but I don't know if that's going to be enough to be able to move the needle on this. We'll just have to see. So okay. So in summary, in terms of dryland practices, the inclusion of fallow is that's going to be a loss. Any minimum tillage with continuous cropping is fairly neutral. It's only when you get to no-till continuous cropping, with or without livestock incorporation, do you have carbon accrual consistently over time. That livestock can be quite variable, at least from our research. And then finally, the perennial grass is that where you can really see some substantial increases in soil carbon over time. But okay, so that's just soil carbon. But are these practices a net greenhouse gas sink? All right. Getting back to the core of this issue, we're talking about trying to mitigate a climate change effect. We got to be looking at not just soil carbon, but other things going on. And so this question is kind of complicated. And one kind of tongue in cheek, when I think about answering this question, I always think about this quote by Mark Twain. I like reading some of his stuff, but he's got these great catchy quotes, and it ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And that is kind of, I think, applies to this issue of dryland cropping practices and the overall greenhouse gas balance. Now, let me explain. All right. So if you look at this graph here, there's a lot going on, but so far I've been kind of talking about what's going on over here to the right about soil carbon. So talking about, different forms of tillage, continuous cropping, haven't talked about biochar or anything like that, but we've been over here on the right side of this, of this slide, but there's all these other sources of gases that we have to consider, the CO2 and the nitrous oxide that comes off from soil management, and specifically, this ties into the nitrogen cycle and the application of fertilizers. There can if there's cattle and they're ruminants, then there's going to be some methane emissions that you have to account for, and then of course there's CO2 emissions associated with producing and applying different inputs, and of course there's emissions, tailpipe emissions from all of the the implements and so forth, the combines, the tractors, and so forth. All of this has to be accounted for if we're going to talk about an overall greenhouse gas balance. All right, and this is it gets kind of complex, and so but. And that's not all. Okay, not all of these gases are created equal. All right, and the methane and the nitrous oxide, which are the two sort of that and CO2, they're sort of the three primary gases that we consider when we're looking at an overall greenhouse gas balance of an agroecosystem. But the kicker is that they're not equal with respect to their capacity to trap heat in the atmosphere. Methane and nitrous oxide are actually a lot stronger at trapping heat, and it just has to do with the chemical composition and how the bonds line up and so forth, and how they interact with radiation. And so using CO2 as the baseline, we can equate, sort of the heat trapping capacity of the methane and nitrous oxide using this term called global warming potential. Okay, and it's essentially a measure of how much heat a greenhouse gas traps in the atmosphere over a specific time horizon relative to CO2. And this is all on a 100-year time horizon. I just pulled this from the IPCC. It's essentially a way to put these gases, these different gases, on sort of the same playing field. Okay, and so all right, so one CO2 is equal to one CO2 equivalent. One methane is like having like 28 CO2s in the atmosphere, and nitrous oxide is much stronger. It's 265. Okay, I mean, so just a little bit of that goes a long way in affecting the overall balance. Okay, so to get at this, you have to go through these. For lack of a better term, it's like an accounting exercise. And back 15 years ago, when I was doing work just on soil carbon, I didn't have this other data. I didn't. I was just talking about carbon change, and that was going to be the carbon offset. But now we have some studies where we've done the work, and we've looked at the suite of different gases that are coming from the soil, and then we've also accounted for emissions that are associated with the inputs. And for those studies where we have livestock, cattle specifically, we have made estimates on the methane emissions from them. Okay, based on the diet that they're eating and the number of days that they're out on the range or the cropland. And so I'm not going to go through all of these different these equations, but the point being is that you in order to get to the net global warming potential of a management practice, you got to add all these things up. Okay, and so we've done some studies here at Mandan to do that, and I'm going to step through 3 of them so you can kind of see how things have played out, from looking at cropping systems to livestock integration, and then finally we'll finish up with a grazing example. And so so the first study here that I'll talk about is some measurements that we did for 3 years on a dryland cropping system study that Don Tanaka started in 1993. And I looked at three crop sequences, all under no-till management: a spring wheat fallow, a continuous spring wheat, and then a spring wheat safflower rye. Where the rye was like a full season cover crop, but it was intended essentially to serve as sort of a snow catch. So that we could, capture a little bit more moisture going in then into the next phase, which would have been spring wheat. And so we went out there and we measured these gas fluxes for 3 years. We did it, we all of these trials that I'm showing you, we just didn't do it in the growing season when it's comfortable. We were out there the entire year because, I thought that if we're going to get annual estimates, you got to measure throughout the entire year. And so there were a lot of interesting stories of some of our wintertime measurements, but that's neither here nor there. The important thing is that on top of accounting for the gas fluxes from the soil and all of the inputs and operations and so forth over 3 years, I took a sort of an 18-year time step on the soil organic carbon change from the beginning of the study up through 2012. So it encompassed the time where we were making those gas flux measurements. Okay, so I'm going to share with you like the main table that tells the story, okay? And this is sort of the global warming potential table, where you have, on top here, you've got the 3 production systems. And then in this first column here, you've got these different factors that are either, they're resulting in emissions to the atmosphere, or there's some uptake from the atmosphere. And so there, you can see things are color coded here. All right. So if it's red, it means that it's net emissions to the atmosphere. If it's black and negative, we're taking CO2 equivalent in. Okay, so there's you got seed production, fertilizer production, pesticide production, obviously. Okay, those all going to be emissions associated with those. There's field operations. But then when we get to the soil organic carbon change, it's like, okay, this is something that, all right, I can really relate to here. This is our carbon change. Okay, and no surprise, spring wheat fallow, we're losing carbon there, not a lot, but it's a loss, and that lines up with what we've seen in the literature. Our continuous spring wheat is a relatively small sink for soil carbon, and that spring wheat safflower rye with that full season cover crop and snow catch actually does a pretty good job. So it's doing a good job sequestering carbon, but when you add all these up, factoring for the methane flux, which were all sinks, and then specifically the nitrous oxide flux, that what it does is it just changes practically everything into a source. Spring wheat fallow, continuous spring wheat, those are strong, greenhouse gas sources. And the minus 14, I mean, I know it shows it's a minus 14, but what you don't see is the error bars around that minus 14. That number is not different from 0. So the best we can really say for spring wheat safflower rye is that we're sort of neutral, I guess, for greenhouse gas balance. And so yeah, that is. It is what it is. This is the science. A little disconcerting, though, but we have to use it as a benchmark to help us understand and design practices that might be able to do better. Okay, that was first example. Now the next example, we'll move to an integrated crop livestock study that started in 1999. And I got around doing the gas flux measurements between 2016 and 2019, actually as part of a NIFA CAP grant that Sandeep Kumar got at South Dakota State. So we were really fortunate to be partners on that project, but it gave us the resources to do these intensive measurements over time. Same. Oh, I should back up the treatments that we compared. 2 3-year rotations, but one was grazed and one was ungrazed, and so that was just a very, very simple contrast. The grazed treatment did have some perennials in it as part of that 3-year rotation, so it had some unique aspects that allowed for production of forage, but both fell within sort of a 3-year rotation phase. Same static chamber methods, and then we used a 15-year time step on the soil organic carbon. So what did we see with respect to global warming potential? Well, a lot of similar things, a lot of red, right? A lot of emissions go into the atmosphere. It's interesting on the grazed, cropland. You're saying, well, why do we have so much more seed? Well, I was telling you that we were putting in forages in certain phases, so there was additional inputs with respect to the seeds that we had to account for. The field operations were slightly higher because there were times in some of that 3-year period where we were having to hay the forages and the graze treatment, and so that just contributed some more emissions to the atmosphere from the tailpipe. And then, of course, certainly we have to account for the influence of the livestock, and so that there were emissions associated with that weren't present within the ungrazed cropland. But again, I'll focus just on the carbon change. Both of these treatments were relatively strong carbon sinks, and that was really encouraging to see. And this is just not near surface. We made these assessments, these stalks down to about a meter, and so that they're fairly robust. And again, over a 15-year time span, really positive. But what you see with the nitrous oxide flux, we essentially negate the CO2 equivalent that's sequestered with soil organic carbon with the N2O emissions. Yeah, we didn't have any greater efficiency under grazed cropland at all. And when it comes to the end of it, both of the treatments are greenhouse gas sources. Yeah, this is not what I hypothesized, I guess, when we started this study. I thought we might see something a little bit different with respect to carbon accrual and maybe some lower N2O emissions under the grazed system, but that was not the case. And so here we are. So we'll move to the last example, and this is our historical pasture treatments that we've had at the station, some of them going back to 1916. And there were 3 treatments that were compared. 2 sort of historically native vegetation pastures that differed in stocking rate. So there was a moderately grazed pasture, then a heavily grazed pasture, and then there was a crested wheatgrass pasture that was established in 1932. It was unique in that there was a small application of nitrogen fertilizer applied to that in the fall, and as you'll see, that had a big influence on the nitrous oxide emissions. But same methods in terms of gas fluxes, and here we looked at a 44-year time step on carbon change, because turns out a previous scientist in the late 50s actually took samples from these treatments, and then we were able to sample from roughly the same equivalent depths in 2003, and then look at the change over that period of time. So the benefit of having an archive, and also the benefit of being able to be at a place that that has the long-term research sites and the samples to go with it. So what did we see here? This is really interesting. Okay, so as I had mentioned, there was a small fertilization done of the crested wheatgrass in the fall, and so there's some emissions associated with the production and application of the nitrogen fertilizer for the crested wheatgrass, but nothing, none of that didn't happen on the 2 historically native pastures with the 2 different stocking rates. You can see the enteric fermentation there. All 3 of them very strong carbon sinks. So we're doing a fantastic job on average on the carbon accrual. And when you add everything up, and I should point out also is that the N2 emissions were fairly moderate on the 2 grazing systems, but they're very high, actually quite high under crested wheatgrass. And we actually saw most of those emissions happen in the wintertime when we had midwinter thaws. It was just incredible peaks of N2O emissions during that period of time. When you add them all up, you get a different result. You see that our 2 native pastures are greenhouse gas sinks. And the crested wheatgrass, even though it had the numerically higher carbon change relative to the 2 pastures, those N2O emissions just pushed everything into the positive territory, and so it's a net greenhouse gas source. But our 2 historically native pastures were greenhouse gas sinks. This was a bit of good news, and what you can do, those numbers are not different, but if you can put the results on a sort of a product equivalent basis, they call it a greenhouse gas intensity. So it's basically the amount of CO2 emissions either accrued or emitted per unit of in this case weight gain. You can actually assign a number to the number of CO2 equivalent to a product. And so here it actually turned out that what we were able to actually gain from a climate mitigation standpoint is actually greater under a lower grazing intensity relative to a heavy grazing intensity. You can see the statistically it turned out to be different. And so yeah, so that 145 pounds of CO2 equivalent per pound of animal weight gain under moderately grazed pasture. So it's interesting. You can take a 5-pound roast and you got about 750 pounds of CO2 equivalent sequestered right there. Now it's interesting to reflect on that. Our daughter lives in Minneapolis, and we go to some pretty fancy grocery stores there, and you can see what they're selling grass-fed beef for at the butcher there, and it kind of opens your eyes. I mean, it's nothing to see a $50 or $60 roast, or sometimes even more than that. Grass-fed, it's what everyone wants. It's sort of the thing, and so it's I guess it's a different form of carbon market, right? I guess it's a different way of looking at that, but that's what we saw from our research here at the site. It's you got to be careful how you extend all that to other areas, but that's what we found from our long-term research. So to summarize, if we look at dryland cropping, our data suggests that it's greenhouse gas source or neutral in the case of where we had the rye. Our integrated crop livestock systems, both of those were a source. But we're a sink undergrazed native pasture. And so that's, when we talk about overall greenhouse gas balance, that is, that's kind of what we see here. Before I leave this though, this whole issue of nitrous oxide, I think is going to get more attention. I think there's going to be, if we're going to think about our cropping practices as trying to minimize their climate impact, we're probably going to have to be a lot tighter with respect to how we treat the nitrogen cycle within our management. But what's interesting about N2O, because it has such a high heat trapping capacity, we can kind of flip the script on this. And I'm borrowing from a paper by Neville Miller here, where he had this great point, is that if we can avoid just emitting 1 pound of N2O, that's like the equivalent of sequestering 265 pounds of CO2. Now think about that in terms of some of the dryland cropping practices that I showed in that one graph. That is actually pretty substantial. But the important thing is that if we can avoid N2O emissions, that is something that is permanent. Okay, whereas a good share of our practices that result in carbon accrual in the soil, particularly in near surface depths, they're going to be temporary in a warming world. They just are. So maybe the focus, in the future is going to be more so on nitrogen. So, all right. So that was just a little bit of a tangent here. My last question has to do, what does all this mean, for our practices here in the Northern Great Plains? I'm thinking more and more about the role of co-benefits and what that means with respect to our different agricultural practices, and specifically, it's what does organic matter provide for our production systems? And I'm sure you all know this stuff, but organic matter is just, and of which carbon is about 58% of. It has just this incredible impact to across the different domains of the soil matrix that can result in real positive improvements in function, okay, physically, chemically, and biologically. And so this is important because what this means is that we can almost, it's a little tenuous with this. I'm a little hesitant, but for the most part, there's a good partnership between soil carbon and soil health. Now, this can totally get off the rails from the standpoint of acidification, and that's a whole another talk. But generally, this is a solid partnership, and so I increasingly think about this issue from the standpoint of if we want to think about in improving our production practices to improve, accrue soil carbon over time, let's just look at things very simply, inputs and outputs. And the key thing here is to make sure that your inputs are going to be greater than your outputs. So there's a lot of this has to do with making sure the soil is covered, minimizing your erosion, making sure you've got plenty of inputs from the standpoint of roots and so forth are going into the soil, and protecting the soil from any erosion. And what's really handy, I think, is that when we can actually compartmentalize those inputs and outputs within the soil health principles, which I think Terence is going to talk about next. The soil armor, the minimum soil disturbance, plant diversity, live root, and livestock integration. I mean, things fit in really well here. Soil armor, well, we're gonna maximize our residue, retain it there, and in the process, we're going to minimize our erosion. We're going to minimize our soil disturbance. Well, we're going to actually reduce the CO2 efflux that's coming from the soil because we're not mixing it up. We're also going to minimize erosion. The plant diversity and continual live root, that all has to do with roots and rhizo deposits and residue and so forth. That's just input into the soil. And the livestock integration kind of gets to that amendment side. So these principles that I think are really relatable are a good way to frame sort of the overall carbon balance to engage people to think about how their practices might be affecting the soil carbon and importantly the soil health. And so on this point, before I leave it, I often get asked, well, which one of these 5 is the most important? Well, that's not a fair question, because in our sort of semi-arid environment, you've got to build things on top of one another. And so you have to kind of first start by minimizing disturbance, and then that improves your water use, capture and efficiency and use, and then you can start to intensify. But once you've done that, I really think this continual live root is an important thing to look at. And it's not just me, it's like these really super smart people who do these meta-analysis, and they look at the contributions of either perennials or cover crops, or sort of like a full season cover crop, like a forage. And it's amazing what you see with respect to changes in the soil, with respect to physical properties, and that can impact your water regulation services, reducing the erosion, improving nutrient retention, and even improving the microbial functions of the soil as well. And what this does is that this overall improves the function of the soil. That'll increase your resistance to external stressors, and also your capacity to be able to bounce back from stress. That gives you sort of additional degrees of freedom to be able to manage within these extremes that we're going to be dealing with, and that really makes your production system sort of, you're going to be more prepared for dealing with these climate challenges. And so it's just something to reflect on. I think it's just the data seems to bear out that this has a really positive effect. So that really makes me kind of wonder what's the co-benefit here. Really, people talk about, well, let's sequester carbon and then we'll get all these co-benefits to the soil properties. But I would almost flip it maybe on its head and say, well, no, let's manage for improved soil health. And if we happen to accrue some carbon along the way, even a little bit, then that's great. And then maybe that's the co-benefit. I think maybe in reality, there's probably a place for both of them. There could be some aspects of our agricultural landscapes that could be targeted to perennials, where you could, a climate mitigation benefit would be almost assured in that case. But then maybe our more of our working lands that are managed a little more intensively, or focus more on that soil health end of things, but with an eye towards efficiency and an eye towards those 5 soil health principles that should, if done in the right way, will be able to tip the balance of sort of CO2 equivalents to that entering into the soil and not being emitted. So that's a lot. Hey, listen, I think I'm probably taking a little more time than I should have, but you can't do this work without an amazing crew, and I have been so fortunate the last over 20 years now with some fantastic people that have worked for me that we wouldn't be able to share this data without them, and so I'm indebted to them, like my core team, and also all the folks at the research center that very supportive for these efforts, and also our Area 4 SCD Cooperative Research Farm. That's a place where it's a wonderful location for us to be able to do our long-term research studies. Turns out a couple of the corner sections are actually for sale now, so it's kind of a disconcerting time, but maybe an opportunity for changes in the future. So anyhow, that's it for me. I will stop sharing and stop my recording, and then we can patch in if any of you happen to have questions or comments. Thanks so much.